Okay, cool. So we're live. So you were saying that you basically don't have any familiarity with 2D arrays, right?
Yep.
But do you understand arrays pretty well, would you say?
No, not like completely well, but I like have a somewhat okay understanding.
Okay. So I guess anytime you're confused, feel free to like jump in and like ask us questions because a lot of 2D arrays are just based off of arrays. So
Okay.
if you get one, you get the other.
Okay.
Yeah, so I am going to screen share to explain ideologically what a 2D array is.
Okay.
So let's find the link. Okay, so if we're looking, you see the checkerboard, I'm guessing, right?
hmm
So basically, a 2D array is used whenever you want to represent some sort of grid or table in code. So, like in this case, they're using a program to try to replicate a checkerboard. But oftentimes, you could see it like for tables of data. Um, you could use 2D arrays to represent pictures, and each element of the array is like a pixel. But that's the basic idea of a 2D array, that you have a certain amount of rows going down, and you have a certain amount of columns going across. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So just like an array, each value in the 2D array is going to store some sort of value. Sometimes those values are objects, so you could store like the references, or sometimes um, you could store like just normal like integer values and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Um, so this is where things get a little bit confusing. So once again, feel free to like completely like call us out anytime you're confused. So Java doesn't have anything specific for arrays, or sorry, for 2D arrays. And what I mean by that is that it it's not its own special entity. Like, you know, for arrays, it's like its own special thing. There's classes for it. It's its own kind of data structure.
Yeah.
2D arrays are basically just an application of arrays. So like, and they're saying here, it's basically just an array of arrays. So you can see here, like here's the reference variable nums,
hmm
and it's going to be pointing to an array here. So notice that the array is of length 5, because there's like a tie to that Stephen will talk about when he's going over the actual syntax. But each element of the array, so like here, 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 so on and so forth, is actually storing a reference to another array. And then that other array is where you have all the different values in the column.
Okay.
So that's how you get the idea of like having like a grid. Because it would be like, imagine there was like an invisible array here, and this invisible array is actually pointing to each individual row. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. So that's basically how 2D arrays work. The main focus is that 2D array is just an array of arrays, and that plays a role in how you handle the syntax for it and why it is the way it is. So if you don't have any questions with that, I guess, Stephen, you could take over for the actual syntax. I can stop screen sharing.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen and go over how to declare 2D arrays. So declaring 2D arrays is pretty much, it's very similar to declaring just regular one-dimensional arrays in that you use the bracket notation. So like if you remember, if we were to declare like an int array, we do like int bracket brackets, the variable name. So for 2D arrays, you pretty much do the same thing, but you just add another set of brackets to indicate that it is a 2D array. So like in this example, we have a two-dimensional integer array, and we have a two-dimensional string array called seating chart. So for this question, what is printed when you type system.out.println ticket info after you do the above declarations? Happen if we tried to print out ticket info.
Would it print the length of the array?
Excuse me?
Would it print the? Does it print anything? I don't think it prints anything.
Okay, so in Java, when we don't we essentially have nothing. What's like the value that is associated with nothing?
Null or 0.
Okay, yeah, null. All right, so let's check if that's right. That's correct.
Okay.
So yeah, so just like how arrays are initialized to null, if you don't use like the new, then the type, and then the brackets, and then you have like the size, it's the same thing with 2D arrays. If you don't do like new, int, bracket, bracket, and then you put in the sizes in the brackets, then it doesn't actually create the array. It just creates a reference variable that will refer to the array.
Okay.
Once you actually do new, and then all that. So that's just summarized here. So like referring back to the previous example, if you have ticket info and you wanted to initialize it as a 2D array with 2 rows and 3 columns, then you just do ticket info equals new int 2 and bracket 3 and bracket. So it's important to know that order does matter in that the rows come before the columns. So like if in the second example, it says seating chart equals new string array, and then it has 3 and then 2. So in this case, it would be 3 rows and 2 columns.
Okay. So rows before columns?
Yes, rows before columns.
Okay.
And it's important to know that we're talking about, when you're declaring a 2D array, we're talking about the size, not. So it's strictly, this would have 3 rows, this would have 2 columns.
Okay. So how do you know which is the length? Like, how do you know how many elements are, like, is it 2 rows and 3 columns? Like, how many elements are in the 2D array? How would we figure that out?
Well, okay, so like, let's think about like a single array, like a one-dimensional array. How would you figure out how many elements are in a single dimensional array?
You would look at the number and then start from 0, so it would be like 1 extra number.
Yeah, when we're talking about indexing, yeah. So it's pretty much the same thing with a 2D array, except like Asta said, it's kind of like if you have a grid, if you're representing a grid in memory. So kind of like if you had like a board, like a checkerboard with 2 rows and 3 columns, then how many total elements would be in that checkerboard?
6?
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
Okay.
It's basically just, it's kind of like you just multiply the rows times the columns.
Okay.
So then how many elements are in ticket info?
6.
Did you say 6?
Yeah, 6.
Actually, don't know if, yep, this is true. It's correct.
Yay.
All right. So now to actually, do I have to go over setting values in a 2D array? Okay.
Doesn't hurt, I
They
suppose.
had to go over. All right. Okay, so setting values in a 2D array, it's very similar to setting values in a single dimensional array. Like Asa said, 2D arrays are an application of arrays. So if we look at this code right here, it's just combining the previous declarations that we had. So like we define the 2D array variable here for both the string and the integer 2D arrays. And then we actually create the arrays here. It's 2, 3, the new string 3, 2. And then to actually initialize the array elements, what you do is you access first the row that you want, and then you access the column that you want. And in this, it's very important to recognize that you have 0-based indexing. So like in an array, you know that you start at the 0th element instead of the first element, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's exactly the same thing with 2D arrays. You start at 0 instead of 1, and you end at the array -1. So like in this case, which, if we're thinking about it, which this would this statement be setting in the array?
The first like square in the grid.
Yeah, exactly. Like if we were thinking about it visually, it'd be like the one at the top left.
Okay. Yeah.
Arrays go from like left to right. And so which one would this be?
The one right down. Does it go down or over?
Well, remember that this is the column number.
So then down. Down one.
Well, columns.
Here, it might be
Okay,
actually
so
easier to see a picture.
Okay.
yeah.
So I guess just like so we can have it as a reference.
Okay.
So yeah, so because it's this is the rows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these are the column indexes.
Okay.
So now looking at the problem, it's for the position 0, 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 0th row, first column.
Okay. So be one over.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's really important that you make sure that you understand the difference between like the rows and the columns, because confusing if you're accessing some element that's like in the middle of the array.
Okay.
Or in the middle of the 2D array.
Okay.
So
Each time you go, like when you build on it, like if you go like 0, 3, 0, 2, like the third one 1, 0, so then it would go down 1 and then stay still in that row.
So you mean like it would go here?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
yep, exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of like a coordinate system in that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
So
then
like if you've ever
what
played
do you
like
have to-
Battleship, then like it's kind of exactly like that. You have these can be like, think about these as like coordinates.
Okay. So then what is the number next to it? Like 15 and 10? Are you just putting those numbers like into the array?
Yeah, these are just the actual like elements of the array. This number just shows you where to put it.
Okay.
It's like the coordinate at what you want to put the element, and then this is the actual element. So since this is an integer array, we're putting integers in the spots.
Okay.
So yeah.
And it's the same for like any type. So like they have like the string seating chart, and you pretty much just do the same thing except you put in strings.
Yep. So I guess if we want to look at the overall like the ticket info array, this is kind of what it looks like with like the value inside of it, just representing what it stores.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Oh yeah, this is kind of important. If you run this, it's out the value of ticket info. It's not going to print out null because it actually has stuff in it. But whenever you try to print out an array, if you don't specify, well, the thing is, arrays themselves don't have like a toString method, so you can't. There's not like really like an elegant way that you could print out all the elements. It's just going to give you, this nonsense, which is really just the address of the array. It's not like I don't know if it's going to be like that big on the exam, but it's just they might ask like one question on it.
But like, so you don't have to use a for loop into the arrays. Like you can just print once you've declared elements or initialized the elements.
You can use a for loop if you want. If your elements are going to be like sequential, so like if you're to make like a 2D array where like each element is like, let's say the row number. So like for the first row, it's like you put in like all ones, but then like for the second row, you put in like all twos, and then the third row, all threes and stuff. Then you could use like a loop because it'd be a lot easier. But you don't necessarily have to. especially if you have like, because like in this case we have like an array that's of 2 rows and 3 columns. Already know the elements and ask you to use a for loop, then you don't necessarily have to, but it's good if you know if you're going to have like a lot of the elements of the same type, or sorry, of the same like magnitude, a certain pattern that you're trying to like get across when you're initializing elements.
Okay.
Okay, so to check your understanding, which of the following sets the value for the 3rd row and the 2nd column of a 2D array called nums? And there's already an answer here, but I pretty much just picked a random one. Well, I know if it's right, but
It's A.
I want to see if you can say. Huh?
A. I think it's the one that you chose.
You think the answer is A?
Yeah.
And why do you think the answer is A?
Because rows before columns, and it says 3rd row, 2nd column.
Well, if we check the answer, it
Dang.
says
So then, oh, but it starts at 0.
yeah.
Okay, wait. D. No, I lied. C.
Okay, and what's your reasoning?
I think it's because 0, 1, 2, and that would be the 3rd row, and column. The 2nd column would be 0, 1. So I think that's true. I think. I'm not sure.
Okay, well, let's check.
Okay.
That's correct. Yay. All right, nice. So also, you can initialize a 2D array similar to the way that you initialize a one-dimensional array, except pretty much we just put in the braces, the single one-dimensional arrays that you'd have for the rows. So like if you wanted to have a row that had like 25, 20, and then 25, and then you just put this in brackets, and then you put a comma, and then you put the other row. So like this would be like the 2nd row, or row at index 1, like the 1st row, or row at index 0. And that's the same thing for like any other type. So if you have like strings or doubles or floats or chars or whatever. So for this question, what is the value at seeding info 2-1 after the code above executes?
Is it Emma Luke? I think. Wait.
And explain your reasoning on that.
I think it's Emma Luke because I don't know. Wait, I have a question. Do you count like since it's like 0, 1, 2, do you count like the 3 ones in there? Like in the brackets, within the brackets that are within the brackets? That doesn't make sense. Okay. Do you count 0, 1, 2 and go Jamal and Maria 0, Jake and Susie 1, and then Emma and Luke 2?
You're right in that saying this would refer to 0,
Okay.
1, and this would refer to 2.
Okay.
But remember that these themselves are arrays. So when it's asking what's the element at row index 2 and then column index 1.
Oh. So then I'm still going with Emma and Luke.
Okay.
Dang it. Okay. Uh, if it's not Jake and Maria, well, no, you can't. Can you take one from? I'm very confused now. Can you take like one from one bracket and one from the other?
Well, that wouldn't necessarily like make sense in memory because the fact is that we're at row major first, so like it's this 2 is referring to like the row index. It was referring to the row index here.
Mhm.
And if we were to say like we want it at row 2, but then like let's take the first element of row index 1, it kind of wouldn't make sense because you already specified that you wanted to be at row index 2. So to kind of like take from another row, then it wouldn't really make sense.
Oh, okay. So then, I guess my next answer is Jake and Susie.
Okay, well, I would say that you were more correct when you said Emma and Luke.
Okay.
You're really, really close. It's what I think you're confused on what we're actually asking for.
Yeah.
Because when it says what is the value at seating info 2-1, be a string array or would that be a string?
Oh. Okay. It's not a string. It is a string.
Okay, and if it's a string, then which string would it be?
Emma. I think.
Remember, index starts at 0.
Is it like just a like would it be like the not parentheses, the bracket, starting from the bracket?
No, we're just looking for a string. So think about which would be at row index 2 and column index 1.
I guess it might be helpful if you draw it out.
Yeah. Oh, so do you want me to draw it out?
Oh, no, I got it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I have it ready too. So
Right.
I just want to see what you're drawing, Jasmine, because then I think that'll help us understand why you're confused about it.
Okay. Let me draw it and see what I'm. So. Okay, I drew it, but I don't know how to show it.
Do you have a video camera?
I do, but it didn't work, and I don't know why.
Oh, that's awkward.
I tried. It worked. Okay.
Hey, okay.
This is what I drew. Can you see it or no?
Yeah. What I'm wondering is, okay, so you got 0, 1, 2, and then 0, 1. So you got it correct.
Yeah, I got it correct. 1 second. Yes, Mom? Okay.
I'm wondering, why do you have a second column? Or like a column with number 2?
I don't know.
Is that just like something you drew by accident, or you think it actually has a value there?
Like I didn't actually think about it was gonna go.
Okay, so just wanted to make sure. So yeah, we both have something similar. So I just drew out some of like the variables and stuff. So you just have the reference seating info pointing to an array that has 0, 1, 2, and each of those arrays, or each element in that array, is pointing to its own array of two elements. So that's how you get the whole 3 rows and 2 columns.
Okay.
So you got that perfectly right. So
Okay.
now we're trying to find the value in 2, 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we go down to column 2 and we go over to column 1,
It's Luke.
yep.
Oh, that makes more sense.
So yeah, because it's giving you a column number, it's actually looking for like a specific element, and so then it's asking you what's the value in that element.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay, so
That makes sense.
Okay,
So
cool.
you had to, because the way you drew it, you had the column thingies first. 0, 1, 2, and then you pointed those to each one. That makes more sense looking at it. Okay.
Yeah, it's like whatever way makes it easier for you to understand. This is like the more technical, like what is actually going on in a 2D array. This is more of like just easier to understand. It's just easier to draw too. It's
Okay.
kind of what focusing on the values of the array itself rather than how it's actually done in memory.
okay, so is there any questions about that?
Not anymore.
Yay!
All right, so now if we look back, when am I still showing my screen?
Yeah.
So looking back at this last example, if you look at this code fragment here, and you can see that we have like an int value, and he said so like ticket info at row index1, and then name is equal to seating info at row index 0 and column index 1. What would be the value of name after the code above executes? You can look back at seating info, and it hasn't changed from last time.
So Maria.
All right, let's see, Maria. And
Yay.
correct.
Cool.
Yep.
All right, so this is one of the examples that Hannah had. I haven't looked through all of it, but let's see.
Should I go over like finding the size of array of the 2D array and stuff like that first?
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so this is just a little bit more of like syntax and semantics. So when you want to, and also this is really helpful when you're doing for loops through 2D arrays.
Mhm.
So when you are, when you're trying to find the size of an array, the natural thing to do would be just do array.length.
Okay.
Because that's just the field and part of the object, just like what you do for a normal 1D array.
Mhm.
But if you actually try to do that with, say we did with seating info, because I have the picture already here. If we actually did seating info.length, since seating info is pointing to this array, it'll only give the number of rows. So since the length of this array is, the length of this array is 3,
Mhm.
so if you just do seating info.length, it'll only give you 3. So it'll always only give you the number of rows.
Okay.
And so that kind of raises the issue of, so it's great, okay, we can find the number of rows, but if we want to try to hit every element in the array, we need to know the number of columns too. And so the way to do that is also based on the fact that a 2D array is an array of an array.
Okay.
So I guess looking at it, what would be your guess as to try to, like, what do you think would be the way to figure out how many columns there are?
Do you have to do the 2 index thingies, like array and then like both the 2D brackets and then dot length, maybe?
No, actually, yeah. You would basically just be like, okay, generally you go for the first array. So, and then you say like, okay, find the length of this one.
Mhm.
But you can technically do it for any, assuming that each row contains the same number of columns.
Mhm.
So what you would end up doing would be like seating info. Sorry, just writing it down. Info 0 dot length. and this would actually give you the actual length of this array,
Mm-hmm.
and which means it's the number of columns.
Okay.
And so when you want to hit every element in a 2D array, what you would do is a nested for loop. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Think, where is it? Here it is. Okay. So for this example, for looping through a 2D array, they have a 2D array that's already being passed into the method. We don't know necessarily what the length or the width is. We're just like doing it in general.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they're doing is like, okay, we're going to hit every row. So we're going to go from row 0 to row a.length. So and which make sure you hit every row there. And then within it, they're going to do for each column. So making sure it's going from column 0 to column up until like the length of the first array.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just going to, in this case, find the average. But does that make sense about why they formatted the for loop, the nested for loop, the way they did?
So first they start with rows,
Mhm.
and then they find the length of the row, and
Mhm.
they do a nested for loop, and then go for the columns. And they put the a sub 0 because they need to find the length of specifically the column.
Yeah, because they're a 2D array is an array of arrays. There's no direct way of just figuring out what the columns is.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of have to go through this slightly indirect way of being like, okay, we know that it's an array of arrays. So if we get one of the arrays, we can find the length of that, and that'll be like the number of columns.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so you sure? Because otherwise, I know something that really confused me. So
For the most part. So then, can you explain like what value and total does? Like,
okay, yeah, totally.
mm,
So, so initially we're setting total to 0 and value to 0, right?
Mhm.
We're gonna go through we're gonna look at first the first row. So rows equal to 0. And now we're gonna look at the first column. So columns equal to 0. So it'll be like that upper left-hand corner.
Mhm.
And so here, what do you think it's doing?
So it's the value is getting the value of row and column, like the double n float. I mean double n int in value, and then total is equal to total plus value. Yeah, that's confusing. I don't get that.
Okay, so I guess just starting with line 12, so I'm just gonna zoom in a little bit. So what it's doing here is that, just like you were saying, it's getting the value that's in row and column. So whatever value is in 0, 0,
Mm-hmm.
and it's storing that in value. And then what it's doing here is like, okay, so whatever's in value, add it to whatever's in total,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to take that, like whatever this whole thing is, whatever's in the parentheses, and we're going to store that back into total.
Okay. So
So
whatever's in value and whatever's already in total, you take it back into total?
yeah, because the way a like assignment statement works is that it always works from right to left.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll always do this side of it first, which means you're adding it. And then you're going to take whatever's on the right and set it to here,
Okay.
to total. So then total will end up equaling total plus value.
Okay.
So like in...
That makes so much more sense now. Oh,
Yay!
because every time my teacher would use like sum equals sum plus 1, I was like, what are you doing? Like, I don't get that.
Mm-hmm.
This
Yeah,
makes
it's definitely not like math.
Yeah. So, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, so that's why like it's hard it's really hard when you're verbalizing comp sci sometimes, because even though it's the equal sign, so you want to say equals, in this case it has nothing to do with equality at all.
Yeah.
It's all about assignment
Okay.
and like setting values. So
Okay.
yeah, so continuing on with this. So let me actually, this might be easier if I draw it out. So if we're looking here at this matrix here, right?
Mhm.
So this is the 2D array. It's going to have 2 rows and 3 columns. Do you see that?
Mhm.
So if we're going to look at this like a practical example of it, so what this code is doing, at least for the first loop, is it's going to the first row, which is this one,
Mhm.
and it's going to the first column, which is this one,
Mhm.
and it's adding that value, which is 1 to total. So what does total equal now?
4. I mean, it's going to this row
Mhm.
in this column. So 0 plus 1.
Yeah, so then total will equal 1.
Okay.
Yep, and then, so column plus plus, so column is now equal to 1, but row is still 0. So
Okay.
that means we're going to go to the first row, but the second column. So looking at this example, it would be 2.
Mm.
So now value is equal to 2. And what it's doing now is it's saying, okay, total was 1. We're going to add value to that. So 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. And we're going to store that back into total. So total is now equal to 3.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So do you see kind of a pattern forming here?
Mhm.
What's the pattern?
Every time you go through the loop, you find the value and then
Mhm.
add it to the total that you already have, and then you store it back in, and then you go through the loop and you increment it. You add one.
Mhm. So basically, what do you think this whole block of code is trying to do?
Um.
If it's adding first 1, then 2, then it looks like it'll add 3, and then keep on going.
Trying to get the total, like the average of this.
Yeah, you were right. For the first half, it's actually finding the sum of every element in the 2D array.
Okay.
And like one thing kind of cool about this code is that it's not specific to any sort of size,
Mhm.
because they're not specifying that, oh, it has to be of length 3, or it has to have like 20 columns and 30 rows. This code will actually work no matter what type of or what size of array you got.
Okay.
And so, so you're getting the sum total of each element in the array, and then it's dividing it by this. So what is like this, the denominator mean?
Um. The length of the row times the length of the column.
Which is,
I don't know. After, wait, is it 1? No, or 0?
well, in this case, we have a dot length, so that's the number of rows. So how many rows do we have in matrix?
2.
Yep. And then this is like, okay, we're going to look at the first row in matrix and find the length of that. So how many columns are in matrix?
3
So then 2 times 3.
is 6.
So it's finding the total number of elements in the 2D array.
Okay.
So it's basically just like you find the average, it's finding adding up all the values and dividing it by its size.
Okay.
And so if we run this code, it gives us 3.5, which is basically what it's saying the average of the 2D array is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The average value,
Yeah, the average value. That's what I meant. Sorry.
kind of like the mean.
Okay.
Well, really, it is the mean.
That makes sense.
Okay, so I guess I'm gonna stop screen sharing now. Okay. So I guess, do you wanna, I think the rest we've kind of covered everything in terms of lecturing, so we can just do practice problems now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
Also, do you want to go over the student example, or we can like switch off like which parts we go over?
sure. Let me pull it up right now, actually. So, do you want to start with part A? I think my internet is getting a little bit slow.
Okay. All right. So this is an example that we found. It's in the format of the AP free response. So we have a student in a school is represented by the following class. So we have a class called student, and there are only two methods in this class. Or I zoom in. Can you see this?
Mhm.
Okay. So there are two methods in this class, get name and get absence count. And get name basically returns the name of the student. Implementation, because they're just, that really doesn't matter. You just have to call the method. And then we have get absence count, which returns the number of times this student has missed class. And there are a lot of other instance variables, constructors, and methods, but they're not being shown because we don't necessarily need them to be shown. And also we have this class called seating chart, which uses a 2D array to represent the seating arrangement of students in a classroom. So if you're thinking about like how in a regular classroom, like a traditional classroom, you have desks and like maybe arranged in like columns of desks and like 4 rows of desks. So you have like 16 desks. That's kind of like what they're trying to model here, where like you have like a certain number of rows of desks and you have a certain number of columns of seats. So we can represent that using a 2D array. So you can see at R, C represents the student in row R and column C in the classroom. And this is the instance variable that they declared called seats. And it is a 2D array of students. And we have two methods here. We have a constructor, a remove absent students. And this constructor basically creates a seating chart with a given number of rows and columns from the students in student list. Oh, wait. Have you gone over lists at all? Like array lists?
Nope.
Like general lists?
Nope.
Okay.
That's
I'm
what
not
we're
sure.
supposed to be starting this week. So.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I think I think I can just give you the method that you have to use to like add students or to like get students. So it should be a I'll give that when we're trying to solve this. So empty seats in the seating chart are represented by null. And this is just giving you the parameters. That you have the rows, number of rows of seats in the classroom, and calls, the number of columns of seats in the classroom. You can assume that rows would be greater than 0, and then columns would be greater than 0, but you actually have like, at least one column and then at least one row. And you can assume that rows times columns is greater than or equal to student list dot size. Basically saying is you can assume that we have enough seats for the number of students.
Okay.
So our post condition would be that students appearing in the seating chart in the same order as they appear in student list, starting at seat 0, 0, and seats is filled column by column from student list, followed by any empty seats, and student list is unchanged. So if we go to part A, it asks us to write the constructor for this seating chart class. It initializes the seats instance variable to a 2D array with a given number of rows and columns. And the students in the student list are copied to the seating chart in the order in which they appear in student list. And they're copied column by column. So as you can see for this example, if we have, if this is student list, just right here, and we were to initialize seating chart, it go column by column. So it'd be, you'd fill up the first column, and then you fill up the second column, you fill up the third column, and then the fourth column with all of these entries in order. The first element would be Karen, second element would be Liz, third element would be Paul, fourth element would be Lester, Henry, Renee, and then so on and so forth. So does that make sense? Okay. And then they say empty seats in the seating chart are represented by null. So like you can see in this example that it ends with Danny, and Danny is at a row index 0 and column index 3. Of two more, we still have two more elements or potential spaces for elements in the 2D array. So those are just going to stay null. All right. And for example, suppose the variable list student roster contains references to student objects in the following order.
So I have a question. How
Yes.
does array, like, I don't know what an array list is, but how does that like fit into what is in the 2D array? Like that's like where I'm confused. Like what does that have to do?
Well, an array list is pretty much just a list, but it has the properties of an array. It's kind of formatted like an array. But it's just, in this example, we're not specifying an array list, we're just specifying a list.
Okay.
And when you learn about polymorphism and inheritance, then you'll learn that we can specify like a list, but we can pass in any type of list. So like an array list is a type of list. An array list is a list. So we can pass in like an array list, we can pass in a linked list, which you're not going to learn about. We can pass in like any type of list, and this code would still run.
Okay.
So just think about an array list as a list. Just a list of elements in a particular order.
Okay.
So for this constructor, what would be the first thing that we'd want to do? Oh, actually, they specify an array list here.
Oh wow, that's not consistent.
Yeah. But anyway, it doesn't really change the problem.
So set them equal to each other. Maybe use this dot array list is equal to array list student, and this dot student is equal to student list.
Well, what we're trying to do in the seating chart is we're trying to initialize data into the seats instance variable. And if you remember, seats is a two-dimensional array of students. And we are given an array list of students called student list, which contains all the students that are in the class. And we're also given the
rows
of seats and the columns of seats in the classroom.
Okay.
So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to initialize all the seats with a particular student from student list.
Oh, okay. So
and just
one student to
go ahead.
You set one student to equal one. Do you set one student to equal like in a row or a column, or you set one student equal to the student list?
You set one student equal to a particular seat. So like it's kind of like we're accessing, if this was our seats array, then we want to put Lester into position 0, 1.
Okay.
Because each one of these boxes here represents a potential student.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay, and I'm just going to look up the ArrayList Java API. you'd kind of need it because you have to call a certain method to get like a certain element at a certain index. So we'll just use the get method here. And basically what it does is it returns the element at the specified position in the list. So use if you were to have like, let's say student array, students, say we have like usually 30 students in the class or something. Then we have students at 0 equals Brad, something. If we had an array list, so like students, array, list of students. Then if we wanted to access the first element, or sorry, it should be, oh yeah, never mind, I was right. So if we wanted to access the first element of students array, then we would use students array dot, and then we'd call this method called get, and then we'd pass in index that we want. So in this case, since we're accessing the first element, 0, then we pass in 0. And basically, it returned the element that's there.
Okay. So for the
if
one
you wanted to
example, would you just call student list dot get 0 and then put the name of the student or the number of them?
call students student list dot get, and then whatever index we're on right now.
Okay.
Okay, so what would be the first thing that you'd want to do to initialize elements into this seats array?
Don't think complicated. Think really simple.
Int. I don't know.
Well, the first thing you would have to do is actually make an array or make a 2D array that you could put stuff into.
So then int array, or yeah.
Well, I believe that it's
Mm.
actually an array of students.
Student, so it's string array.
Let's
There's
see.
actually a student class.
Mhm.
So when we say like student 2D array seats, this is referring, the type of this 2D array is of student. So we want to initialize a 2D array of students because students is an actual class that they created up here.
Oh.
So it's just like an array of objects, basically. And we have an object that is of type student. Just like you can have an array of integers or an array of strings. Similar idea. This is just another type of thing that we're putting into it.
So then student so student would be the type.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then do you set it equal to the first position in the array? Like the first element in the array?
Well, we're trying to actually create the 2D array first.
Okay.
So just
So
don't
then-
even think about like actually putting in stuff because we actually have to create the array first.
Mhm.
The constructor, and we have to actually create the array.
So then you put student and then the two brackets?
Yeah. And what would you pass into those brackets?
The rows and columns. So,
Yep.
but do you put actual numbers in the rows and columns? Like,
Well, for rows and columns, we don't know what the number of rows and columns will be to begin with, because the user could, they want 10 columns and 5 rows, or they want like 6 columns and 7 rows.
okay.
So we don't know beforehand. So that's why we're using parameters, because at runtime, the program will decide what rows and columns will be, like the actual like numerical value of rows and columns.
Okay. So then student and then the two brackets equals new something? New student?
Yep.
So it'll actually look like this, and I'm sending it on the chat right now.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
Because it's containing students, and you're right about like the brackets, row, and column. And so we're taking whatever new object we make, and we're saving the address into seats.
Okay.
Okay.
Makes sense.
All right. So once we actually create the array, we actually need to initialize values into it. Because right now, if you remember that when we create an array, we have a bunch of spaces, we have a bunch of boxes to put elements in, but we don't actually have any elements there.
Mhm.
So how would we initialize the elements into the 2D array?
Would you
And remember that we're going column by column, so like just refer to like this diagram here.
oh, is it the way that it did in the review? So you would put like seats equals and then bracket 0, bracket 0
Yeah.
equals.
Yeah, so it'd be like 0, 0 would be the first element, and then how would you how would you call the get method of array list to like get whatever student at student list? Like what would be the index if you said like student list dot get?
0. Student list I get and then in parentheses 0.
Yeah, exactly. Because we want to get the first element in the list, and we're putting it at the first element in the 2D array.
Okay.
But that's only to do it for one student.
Okay.
How
So
would we
then
generalize it?
for each student, so you go 0, 1.
Yeah, but like that's one way you can do it. But another way that you can do it using some iterative construct that we've learned.
Oh, a for loop.
Yeah, exactly. So you can use for loops to kind of generalize this so that you don't actually have to like do like 10 different statements saying like student or seats at 0, 0 equals student dot get 0, and then student seats at 0, 1.
A nested for loop.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
So I guess if we were writing it, how we would want to go through every element in the 2D array, right?
Mhm.
So how do we set up this for loop?
So for
Mm-hmm.
int row equals 0.
Would this be going by rows or by columns, Stephen? Because it looks like it's doing.
It's by columns.
Okay. So for int column
Mm-hmm.
equals 0.
Mhm.
And then a dot length.
Well,
A is less than.
well, first it would be seats, just because we're using
Oh
the name
yeah.
of our 2D array seats. But also, if you do seats.length, that gives you the number of rows.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
So then seats sub 0.
Yep.
And then column plus plus.
Mhm.
Okay. And then you put another for loop in there, right?
Yep.
And then this time it would be for row int
Mhm.
row equals 0. And then seats. This time it's dot length because it's rows, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
So rows less than seats.length. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And then row plus plus.
Yep.
Yay.
Solid. We're like halfway there.
Okay.
Okay. So now, is there a way to combine what Steven was talking about with using the get method to try to set each value?
Would you? So would you do? Is it seats or student list? Would be.
Well, we're taking a value in student list and we're putting it into seats.
Oh, okay. So then, seats equals.
Well, which value of seats do we want?
Seats 0 0.
Yep. So if we're going to generalize that, it would be seats column row, right?
Oh, okay.
Yep. Because we want to make sure that this works for every value.
Okay.
So that. Wait, Steven,
Would
what
it
do
be
we
row
need?
column?
Yeah, that's what
Would
that
we-
actually.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, like we're doing it column by column.
Mhm.
And we have to use the get method of array list to get like the next element in the list. So what I'd suggest is to have like a separate value or a separate index for a list, and then just increment it each time from like your index of like your seats.
How would you do that?
Okay, so like you could have your rows and your columns, and so you know how many rows you're gonna have, and you know how many columns you're gonna have, and then you could have like, let's say, just a variable called index, and we set it equal to 0, and then each time we get we get a student, we increment index. So like in this example, we had seats at 0 0, and we'd have like student list dot get, and then we'd have like index, and then would increment index. So like index is equal to index plus 1.
Oh, okay.
All seats at, actually, I'll generalize this to say rows, columns. And so like when we call this again, then it's going to call the next student in the student list, because index would be incremented. So in this case, it wouldn't be Karen anymore. It'd be Liz.
Okay.
And then you just keep doing that until you get to the end of the list.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So where will we go from there? I actually don't even know what you have written down.
It looks like gibberish. But basically, I think.
Can you share what you have written down in the chat?
Yeah. So
Okay.
after, do you want me to do the for loops too after for loops? Or
Just write down everything that you have so far.
so for int call equals 0, and then that's the first part, and then for and after that, I have, well, I was gonna have the seats and then the row and the columns, but if you wanted to increment it like you did, then I guess index equals 0, and then seats rows.
Well, actually, int index equals row is something you should have. Oh, sorry, int index
Before
equals 0.
Before the for loops, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
You want it to exist before you even start iterating through the seats.
Okay. Then that, and then which one? And semicolons and correct placement of spaces. And then after that, so since once we've incremented through each person, then it wants us to find like each person, each seat in the classroom, each like row and column in the classroom.
Could you explain that again?
For the what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, does it want us, after we've incremented through the whole thing, does the question ask like to find each seat in like what would happen after this? I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, okay. So what would happen after this is once you stop incrementing, or you stop accessing all the students in the student list, then you basically set the remaining seats to null. But if you remember that whenever you create an array of a type object, that all the values in the array are set to null by default. So you wouldn't have to do anything after that. Pretty much just the method. So so you wouldn't have to like return or anything. You just that'd be like the end of the code.
Okay. So you just run it. Oh my gosh. Okay. I get it. Can I have that example?
Oh yeah, we'll definitely be sharing all the code that we use as examples, and we have the worksheets that we're using here on the document as well.
Okay.
So by tomorrow probably, or at least by the time the weekend is over, it'll be sent out and shared with you guys.
Okay.
Did you get the one for arrays by any chance?
Yes, I did. I remembered seeing that.
Okay, cool. So that means sharing it with all of you guys works.
Yeah. It
Okay.
works. It works. Darn.
Well, I actually need to get going in like 5 minutes. So I guess maybe this problem is something we can go over during a one-on-one maybe.
Yeah.
This one also does delve into more array lists than actual 2D arrays. So we did slightly go out of our scope today, but I think it was a good example.
Okay.
So I guess, do you have any other questions?
Nope.
Okay. Anything else you think we need to cover, Stephen?
No, I think that was
Yeah, I
a
think
good overview of 2D arrays.
yeah, I think that problem hit
questions?
on like everything that we did
Yeah.
today, which is really great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess just general service announcements. We're gonna be doing our first in-person meeting next Saturday, so on March 4th.
Okay.
So it'd be great if you could come to College Park because then you get to see us in person.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we do have we will be providing like capabilities so that you could tune in online.
Okay.
And the only thing I think you really need for the in-person session is your laptop and a charger would be good.
Okay.
And to download something called Alice.
Okay.
And I think Kate provided the link to that on the email that she sent you guys.
Okay.
So if you could come with that installed, that'd be really great.
Okay.
Anything else, Stephen?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, cool. So no other questions?
Nope.
Okay, cool. So I'll see you tomorrow for our one-on-one. Sorry about mixing up the dates again.
That's okay.
I've been mixing up like the dates this whole weekend. It's been crazy.
That's all right.
But okay, so I guess I will see you later, and then see you later, Stephen, too.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
See you.
Bye, guys.